Company Rule Expands. This video is brought to you by Unacademy in association with GyanCentral.com. By the mid of the 18th century, most of the independent kingdoms had opted against the company. The timeline given above depicts the various wars fought between the independent kingdoms and the company. The British applied many administrative, political, and military policies to overcome and annex lands. So by the mid of 1700s, after the Battle of Buxar was fought, the company appointed residents in the states. Through these residents, the company officials interfered in the internal affairs of the states. They tried to decide who was going to be the successor to the throne and who wants to be appointed to the administrative posts. The company then came up with the idea of subsidiary alliance. According to the terms of this alliance, the Indian rulers were not allowed to have their independent armed forces. They were to be protected by the company but had to pay for the subsidiary forces that the company was supposed to maintain for the purpose of this protection. If the rulers failed to make the payment, then part of the territory was taken away as penalty. For example, the Nawab of Awadh and Hyderabad were forced to cede their territories on similar grounds. Company resorted to a direct military confrontation when it saw a threat to its political or economic interests. As we know from earlier that many independent kingdoms fought with the British. Let us first consider the case of Mysore, which fought 4 wars with the British, and only in the last war did the British actually attain complete victory. Mysore had grown in strength under the powers of Hyder Ali and his famous son Tipu Sultan. Mysore controlled the profitable trade of the entire Malabar coast, from where the company purchased pepper and cardamom. The rulers of Mysore were rigid and did not succumb to the company's wishes. The first Anglo-Mysore War saw Hyder Ali gain some measure of success against the British, but suffering heavy defeats at the hands of the Marathas. Hyder Ali's alliance with the Nizam of Hyderabad against the British too was a failure, owing to the defeats of their combined power against the British, and later the spread of mutual suspicion between the two Islamic powers. The kingdom of Mysore regained some of its lost lands but had to relinquish many territories to the south of Mysore to the British. In the Second Anglo-Mysore War, the British commander repeatedly defeated Hyder Ali and his superior army. The war ended with the Treaty of Mangalore, in which both sides agreed to restore the other's land to the state in which things were before war. When Tipu Sultan became the ruler of Mysore, he stopped trading sandalwood, pepper and cardamom through the ports of his kingdom, and he also disallowed local merchants from trading with the company. He established a close relationship with the French and also modernized his army with their help. The British were furious. The Third Anglo-Mysore War lasted 3 years and was a resounding defeat for Mysore. The British saw Mysore's alliance with the French as a threat to the company, and Mysore was attacked from all 4 sides. Tipu Sultan's troops were outnumbered by 1:4 in this war. The Nizam of Hyderabad and the Marathas attacked from the north, and the British won a decisive victory, and Tipu Sultan was killed defending his city Seringapatam. Much of the remaining Mysorean territory was annexed by the British Nizam and the Marathas. Remaining parts of Mysore was placed under the former ruling dynasty of Vodiyas, and a subsidiary alliance was imposed on their states. By the end of the 18th century, the Marathas were getting pretty powerful, and the British sought to curb this power. The Marathas were divided into many states under different chiefs belonging to the dynasties such as Scindia, Holkar, Gaikwad and Bhosle. These chiefs were held together in a confederacy under a Peshwa, who became its effective military and administrative head. This Peshwa was based in Pune. The Marathas were subdued in a series of wars. The First Anglo-Maratha War ended with the Treaty of Salbai, where there was no clear victor. The Second Anglo-Maratha War was fought on different fronts, resulting from the British gaining Orissa and territories north of the Yamuna River, including Agra and Delhi. Finally, the Third Anglo-Maratha War thrust the Maratha power. The Peshwa was removed and sent away. The company now had complete control over the territory south of Vindhyas. Whilst the company expanded its rule, many other problems also came up. One of them was the Great Famine of Bengal, which struck in the year 1770. 2 years before this famine struck, a partial shortfall of crops occurred in 1768, which were followed by more severe conditions in the next year. By the early 1770s, there was starvation followed by deaths on a large scale. Even though the company was the de facto ruler of Bengal, alarming reports made by the rural community were ignored by the British. By the mid 1770s, deaths from starvation were occurring on a large scale. As a result of the famine, large areas were depopulated and returned to jungle for decades to come. The famine occurred due to the British East India Company's policies in Bengal. As a trading body, the company only focused to maximize profits. The profits to be obtained from Bengal came from land tax and trade tariffs. As lands came under the company's control, the land tax was typically raised fivefold. So, what was earlier 10% now became 50%. In the first years of the rule, the company's total land tax income was doubled, and most of this revenue flowed out of the company. As the famine approached its height, the company announced that the land tax for the following year will be further increased by 10%. Now imagine the distress of the rural community in Bengal. So by the early 1770s, the company was in huge financial distress. It asked for some help or assistance from the British government. Faced with corruption amongst the company officials in India, the British government decided to control the activities of the East India Company. Hence came the Regulating Act in 1773. However, this Regulating Act failed soon. So a new act known as the Pitt's India Act was introduced in the year 1784, that is 7 years after the Regulating Act. This Pitt's India Act basically comprised of a governing body with 6 members, 2 of which were members of the British Cabinet and the remaining were from the Privy Council. This board also had a president who became the Minister for the Affairs of the East India Company. The board had power over all civil, military and revenue related actions taken by the company. The governing council of the company was reduced to only 3 members, and the Governor General was authorized to veto majority of the decisions. The Pitt's India Act was the stepping stone for the British government to take charge of India from the hands of the English East India Company. In our next video, we'll be talking about many of the political, economic and diplomatic methods employed by the British in the early 19th century.